Mara Hesper first heard the rumor from a street vendor who sold roasted chestnuts by the river. The vendor told her about a library whose books were free to borrow, but punishably costly to return late, a quiet place tucked in the oldest quarter of Greywick, where time itself was tallied like coin. Most people laughed at the story, but Mara felt the vendor's words settle on her skin like static. She had always been drawn to odd corners of the city, abandoned clock towers, drained fountains, alleys where the gas lamps were permanently dim, and the idea of a place where minutes might be weighed and counted seemed less absurd than enticing. 2 evenings later, rain stippled the cobblestones while Mara wandered those narrowing streets, following faded plaques and half-remembered references from the vendor's tale. She nearly missed the library's entrance, an arched teak doorway wedged between a shuttered tailor and a pawnshop whose single display item was a cracked metronome. A brass plate beside the door read simply, "The Greywick Library." No hours, no motto, no heraldic griffin or owl. Only the name, as though that alone were explanation enough. She pushed on the handle, and the door swung inward without a sound. Inside, the library seemed larger than the block should allow. Narrow galleries branched like roots, lined with shelves whose oak smelled faintly of bonfires. Lit candles floated in small glass globes that glided overhead along invisible tracks. The air was warm, yet unstirred, as though the building breathed in long pauses. At the center, behind a semicircular desk carved with astrological sigils, sat the head librarian. She was writing in an enormous ledger, her quill scratching leisurely. Her hair, silver-threaded with black, hung in a single braid to her waist, yet her face showed no crease. She might have been 30, she might have been 60. The ambiguity made Mara suddenly self-conscious of her own whisk-broom ponytail and raindrop-spotted coat. "Good evening," Mara ventured. The librarian's quill halted, brown eyes lifted, measuring, polite but not warm. "Welcome, patron." Her voice carried the resonance of practiced quiet, a softness that nonetheless filled the hall. "If you intend to borrow, you will need a card." "I'd like one," Mara said, then hesitated. "Is there a fee?" The librarian smiled thin, amused. "None at all. Our books are free, provided they are returned by the due date indicated on their slip." She gestured to a stack of cards, then added as if in afterthought, "Late returns incur penalties." "What kind of penalties?" Mara asked, aware she sounded like someone reciting a cautionary folktale, but unable to stop herself. "Proportionate," the librarian replied, "to the lateness." She slid a blank parchment forward. "Your name?" Mara gave it. The librarian wrote with swift strokes. "Mara Hesper." "Address?" Mara provided her boarding house on 5th Crescent. The librarian nodded, folded the parchment, tapped it once, and, with a hush like pages turning, it stiffened into a card heat embossed with Mara's name in gilt. The librarian handed it across. Her fingers were cool, her nails down-curved like raven beaks. Mara's pulse thumped. "Thank you." "Calderon," the librarian supplied. "Elwyn Calderon, head librarian." She inclined her head. "If you require assistance selecting a title, do ask." Mara wandered. The shelves hummed quietly, as though books discussed among themselves. She stopped before a case labeled "Obsolete Constellations" and pulled a slim volume on the lost stars of the Whispering South. Its cover was midnight leather. Inside, precise diagrams mapped out celestial bodies no modern atlas named. Each page smelled starry, metallic. She read 3 chapters standing before realizing 30 minutes had passed. At the desk, Miss Calderon stamped the card, marking a due date, 3 days hence, at closing bell. That night, Mara sat beneath her attic skylight, reading the entire book, unable to sleep until she'd traced every desolate phantom star. When she finished, Dawn had silvered the rooftops. She told herself she'd return the volume immediately after work. Life, however, cluttered her intentions. The bakery where she kneaded doughs suffered a busted oven valve. The landlord demanded rent a day early. Her friend Lottie fell ill and required broth delivered across town. 3 sunrises slipped by. Only when Mara touched her satchel for an umbrella did her fingers brush the corner of the borrowed book, and dread flared. She dashed back to the library, breath clouding in the chill dusk. The door admitted her, still silent, as though expecting her. Miss Calderon looked up from her ledger, eyes dark as ink. "Miss Hesper," she said, already knowing. 4 days overdue, 3 days late. Mara babbled apologies, set the book gently on the counter. Miss Calderon opened the ledger to a fresh page. "Overdue fees are payable upon return," she recited. "I don't have money," Mara whispered. "It is not money we collect." The librarian dipped her quill. "The sum owed is 3 years." Mara laughed despite herself. 3? What? Years of life. 1 per day. She wrote Mara's name. Then, the numeral 3. "You may, of course, refuse to pay, but in that case we shall consider the debt accruing at compounded rates. Each sundown doubles the remainder. Time, you will find, has a ruthless interest." Mara's knees softened. "You can't be serious," she managed. "I am incapable of jest." Miss Calderon extended her hand, palm up. The floating candles brightened subtly, as though herald to a ceremony. "Do you consent?" The absurdity warred with the impossible certainty glinting in those eyes. Mara felt the room pivot around her like a great gear. "If I give them, will I die in 3 years sooner?" "You will surrender 3 years from your allotment. You will not feel it at once. Only when the natural terminus of your life arrives, 3 years sooner than it might have." The librarian's voice carried neither malice nor pity. "A painless extraction." Mara thought of her mother, dead at 52 from a winter cough. She thought of her father, vanished in the mines. Years were not cheap tokens tossed into fountains. They were bone and breath. Yet she sensed another truth. Refusal would not free her. The debt would grow like mold. Unable to imagine a world where libraries could enforce such magic, she nonetheless felt its cold assurance press around her ribs. "I consent," she whispered, voice brittle. Not harshly, but with unmistakable claim. A chill raced from contact to collarbone. For an instant Mara saw, behind the librarian's calm face, a sky swirling with lost constellations. Then the numbness retreated. When Miss Calderon released her, Mara staggered. She felt lightheaded as after fever or heartbreak. The ledger's ink glowed briefly, then dulled. "Your balance is settled," Miss Calderon said. She stamped the slip complete. "Do take care to return future borrowings timely." Mara left under a sky the color of ashes, feeling both punished and filched. On the tram home, her fingers trembled. She examined her reflection in the window, half expecting to see gray in her hair. Nothing looked altered, yet something intimate had been pried loose, unreachable. That night she slept poorly, haunted by dreams of hourglasses cracked open, sand spinning upward. Morning found her with a resolve she had never known. She would learn how the librarian harvested time, and she would reclaim what was stolen. She returned the next afternoon and volunteered. "I owe a debt of gratitude," she said, masking resentment beneath earnestness. "May I help shelve or catalog?" Miss Calderon assessed her, perhaps discerning motive, perhaps only amused. "We seldom refuse unpaid labor." "Very well, come evenings." She handed Mara a brass pin, shaped like an open book. "Wear this." So Mara began her apprenticeship. By day she kneaded dough. By evening she toiled among dusty alcoves, shelving tomes whose inks shifted shade under candlelight. She learned the classification system. Subjects range from botany, non-existent, to ethics, expired. Patrons visited rarely, a mathematician with trembling hands, a veiled widow, a boy bearing fresh scars. Each whispered, Each returned books with eyes downcast. Some left a little paler than they entered. Weeks passed. Mara cultivated invisibility, sliding along corridors Miss Calderon had long trod alone. She discovered doors disguised as tapestry, staircases folding within walls. One winter night, she followed dim lamps into an archive far beneath street level, the archive of ledgers. Row after row of gigantic books sprawled on pedestals of iron. Mara selected one at random. Inside, in Miss Calderon's neat script, were names, dates, and columns labeled years collected. Some entries listed fractions, others 15 or 20, a handful over 100. The oldest ledger bore a date 3 centuries prior. 296 years Miss Calderon had served as head librarian, and her tallies amounted to a staggering trove. The realization rattled her. The librarian's ageless composure, the cold authority, it all rested on those stolen fragments. Miss Calderon was centuries old, collecting eternity book by book. Mara searched the M section and found her own name. Mara Hesper, 3. The ink shimmered like a bandage over a wound. Rage boiled. Yet more potent than rage was an idea that flared like phosphorus. Nothing in the library existed without order. Every transaction was documented. Could documentation also be undone? Back upstairs, Mara feigned routine while studying Miss Calderon's habits. She left each night precisely at the 11th chime, vanishing through a rear door. She arrived at dawn. She alone possessed keys to the archive. Mara sought allies. She approached a mathematician, Dr. Celius Athler, witnessing him surrender 9 years for a treatise on impossible primes. His gaunt face hollowed in resignation until Mara murmured, "I want them returned." Dr. Celia's eyes ignited like sun through crackled glass. Over the next days, they recruited others. Lottie, whose recovery left her indebted 5 years for a medical compendium. Peter, the scarred boy who'd lost 2 years after his borrowed atlas shielded him from his father's fists. Secretly, they met in an abandoned conservatory, plotting among broken violins. Dr. Celius brought equations of time. Lottie, herbal concoctions to blur senses. Mara supplied knowledge of corridors. They needed one thing, the master ledger currently in use. Without it, they could not alter entries. There was no guarantee edited archives changed reality, but intuition insisted the ledgers were binding instruments. The plan hinged on a loophole. If Miss Calderon herself borrowed an item and returned it late, she would owe. Mara remembered the librarian's smug recitation. Rules applied to anyone. The trick was to trick her. Mara selected their bait. The current ledger, the one continually updated. She would persuade Ms. Calderon to authorize its removal under the guise of night work. Once the ledger left its pedestal, a due date could be stamped. Then the band would sabotage its timely return, compelling a fee. Implementation unfolded during an icy dusk. Mara approached the desk carrying a stack of returned volumes. "I've noticed," she said, feigning concern, "several cross-references misfiled. If I could take the ledger upstairs to reconcile notations, the reshelving will go faster." Miss Calderon's gaze sharpened. "The ledger never leaves my possession." "Of course," Mara corrected, heart banging. "I meant in your presence. Perhaps overnight in the cataloging alcove?" The librarian studied her with unnerving stillness. Minutes seemed to drizzle. At last she nodded once. "Very well, Miss Hesper, but it is to be returned by closing bell tomorrow." She lifted the ledger, stamped a slip, and crucially signed her own name as borrower. Mara's breath caught. The due date read, the next night, 11 chimes. Mara spent that evening transcribing worthless cross-references, while Dr. Celius and Lottie prepared. At 10:30, when Miss Calderon retired to her mysterious quarters, Mara carried the ledger to the basement vault. She placed it on a plinth rigged with Dr. Celius's clever clockwork device. At precisely 11, Brass claws would slam an iron lid shut, locking the ledger inside a casket requiring 2 keys, neither of which the librarian possessed. One key Lodi swallowed in a gelatin capsule. The other Pieter raced across the city to drop inside the sealed donation box of St. Octave's orphanage. The 11th bell tolled, deep and tremulous. The device clanged, the lid shut, bolts snapping. Mara exhaled. The due time passed. They had made Miss Calderon late. Morning arrived. Mara stood by the desk when Miss Calderon descended, braid gleaming. "The ledger," she said evenly. Mara shook her head. "I am unable to produce it." Cold silence bloomed. "Explain." "It is overdue now by your reckoning. You are the borrower of record." Mara laid the stamped slip upon the counter. Miss Calderon's eyes flicked to the paper. No shock registered, but the globed candles overhead wavered, their flames guttering sidewise despite lack of breeze. "You misunderstand the hierarchy," she said softly. "Do I?" Mara replied, forcing steadiness. Patrons drifted near, sensing tension. "The rules say nothing of exemption." Miss Calderon inhaled. The library's walls creaked like ships. For the first time, Mara glimpsed uncertainty cross that ageless face. If she admitted immunity, the system's authority would fracture. If she honored the contract, she would owe. "I will retrieve the ledger," Miss Calderon decided. "You cannot until the debts are settled. The bookkeeping magic binds the object." Dr. Salyer stepped forward, clutching a sheaf of equations. "Think of it as a closed function, requiring resolution." Lottie, cheeks flushed, revealed a single key in her palm after coughing up the capsule. "One key," she declared. "The other is beyond reach, unless you repay what you owe." Patrons widened circles, some hopeful, some afraid. Mrs. Calderon's gaze cut through them. "This is mutiny." "This is exactitude," Mara replied. "By your own doctrine, lateness is taxed 1 year per day. It is now 1 day late." She glanced at the tall clock. The minute hand slid past the first mark, beyond 11. "Shall we negotiate interest?" The librarian's breath faltered. She seemed to weigh centuries against principle. Finally, her shoulders rose and fell. "Failure, then," she conceded, voice low. 3, Mara countered. "1 for my years lost, 1 distributed among these patrons, and 1 donated freely to balance your scales." Murmurs rippled. Miss Calderon's nostrils flared. "You presume bargain power?" "I possess it," Mara answered, "because you crafted the rules." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Give back what you siphoned, or watch every borrower flee, taking whispers of this place with them. In solitude, your eternity will taste like dust." Something fragile in Miss Calderon's eyes flickered. Loneliness, maybe. She glanced to the shelves, as though seeking counsel from bindings. After a tense stillness, she extended her hand. 3 years. Mara grasped it. The chill that once drained her now reversed. Warmth coursed in, spilling through her. Images flashed. Snowy birthdays she might live to see. Breaths on some future mountainside. An unborn child's laughter. She gasped, tears stinging. Dr. Salyer straightened, color infusing his cheeks. Lottie stood taller. Even Pieto's scars seemed less livid. The candles brightened, flooding the hall with dawnlight, though outside it still rained. Miss Calderon looked suddenly older, not decrepit, but gently mortal. Fine lines mapped her eyes, her braids streaked white. She blinked as though focusing from great distance. "It is done," she whispered. With trembling fingers, Mara produced the key. Miss Calderon unlocked the iron casket herself, retrieved the ledger, and returned it to the desk. She stroked its spine once, reverently. "What will become of the other ledgers?" Mara asked. "They are my past." Miss Calderon's tone held quiet fatigue. "But I have forfeited dominion. The library requires a custodian, one who remembers cost." She lifted Mara's brass pin, unclasped it, and pinned it over Mara's heart. "You will see to it the collection remains whole." Mara recoiled. "I didn't do this to take your post." Power seldom asks permission. Miss Calderon's smile was faintly rueful. I have debts unresolved, deeds to reconcile. That task is mine alone, outside these walls. She touched the desk one last time, then walked toward the arched doorway. No flame dimmed at her departure, no thunderclap sealed fate. She simply left, a woman curiously lighter without her centuries. Patrons clustered around Mara, unsure, hopeful. She steadied her breath. The library stands, she announced. But the policy has changed. Knowledge must not cost years. Dr. Saliers asked, what then? Will it cost? Respect, she said slowly, shaping the word. Service, a promise to add something of worth. Music, equations, stories, to the archive upon each borrowing. Contribution, not subtraction. Heads nodded. That night, alone, Mara walked aisles humming with reborn possibility. She felt the 3 reclaimed years nested inside her like fledgling birds. When she passed the shelves labeled obsolete constellations, she replaced the slim volume and stroked its spine. Above, globed candles floated on, patient. In the basement archives, she found a blank ledger. She opened to the first page and wrote, New Age of the Wiley Library, Day 1, Overdue fee schedule, none. She considered adding a flourish, but decided against it. Simplicity suited new beginnings. As she climbed the stair, a breeze rustled unseen, as if books exhaled relief. Outside, the rain had stopped. A scrim of stars pierced the city's smog. Mara searched for one of the lost constellations the book had shown her. Near the horizon, she thought she glimpsed it, a faint arrangement of lights, trembling but intact. Somewhere beyond, Eloine Calderon walked into her overdue future, carrying centuries she would now have to spend rather than store. Mara wished her fair fortune. Time, she had learned, was not a commodity to hoard. It was a story to be shared, chapter by living chapter, until its pages ran gracefully out.